Well, hey, welcome to part 2 of Kerry's sermon. My name is Jeff Peters. I have here Kerry, or should I say one take Kerry?
I don't know.
Right?
The name going around now.
It was really good. And Jonathan Simpson. Kerry introduced all of us earlier, and this is an experiment. We don't know what we're doing here, but we are simply following up the monologue with the dialogue, trying to create just a little bit more engagement with you at home. And so you will know that week by week we will do our best to try to grow this and increase this engagement. We don't know what that looks like yet, but your feedback will be really helpful in this time. So if you've got questions or if you have ideas, we might not make use of them all, but feel free to send them in, and expect a little bit more next week as we continue on with this kind of thing. So, but for now, we want to just create a little bit of discussion around the text of John 6, this idea of living water. And the sermon that Kerry just preached, there it is, all around. And the sermon that Kerry just preached
use some living water, yeah.
On this idea of Jesus crossing the lake without a boat, and creating a bit of a stir, we might say. So I thought we would begin with you acknowledged, Kerry. Thank you for your words, by the way. But you acknowledged that, look, in this text, we have the situation, and under normal circumstances, preaching it, we would try to help people imagine a time when they were afraid. And because we have to hypothetically kind of draw up this moment with people, right? This is what we do when we read these narratives in the Gospels. But you nodded towards, actually, we don't have to imagine because this is in our face right now. So not to make this whole sermon about COVID-19. I don't think that's our goal. No. But to acknowledge it, I think, is important. And to say, so how are you feeling at this time? How are the people whom you are still networked with, ministering to as pastors, how are we feeling? How are they feeling in this moment? Maybe we could have a few comments in that regard.
Yeah, well, we're figuring it out as we go, and I'll be honest. This last week's been tough.
Yeah.
That it's only been a week.
And it's only been a week.
It's crazy to think it. Yeah.
I mean, we listen to the news every day, and there's changes, and we're trying to respond appropriately to the current reality, but the reality has changed from day to day. We're trying to make the right decisions for our church and for the people that are associated with our staff and our whole congregation. And we hope we're making the right ones. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. And it's stressful. I had a headache yesterday. I hope it wasn't a virus headache, but I asked somebody, they said it's probably stress, Kerry. So yeah, we're feeling it.
Yeah, I've been thinking that, I'm 9 months into being a pastor, and so for some people they're saying, "Oh, pastors are have to figure out a new way to be a pastor in this time." And I'm like, I feel like I was just figuring out how to just be a pastor, so it's a bit of a whirlwind of like, okay, I was maybe just getting my bearings of how to do this regularly, and now it's in a different time and have to respond in certain ways. So it's still encouraging. Like I was mentioning to Jeff just before this that I found when we are connecting with people over social media or just text, that even things like response time and what people are sharing is just, you can see people leaning into that, like a realization that this is where we're at, and it's maybe not ideal, but if we just sit and slowly immerse ourselves in it and try to go, oh, but are we sure this is really the reality we're living in? I think just to dive in head first and say, okay, this is a new normal for us. Here's how we're going to respond. And so it has been encouraging in times. Certainly, yeah, I'm not always sure how to lead in this time and figuring that out, and there's more discussion there, but there has been encouragement in it, and I think that's helpful.
Hate to break it to you, Jonathan, but may speak for yourself, but I still don't feel like I have my bearings as a pastor. So keep striving for it.
Okay,
tell me how that goes.
That unattainable
Is
goal.
there a verse that says cease striving? I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. That's really good. I mean, this I shared at staff meeting. The word that comes to mind for me is paradox, because there seems to be competing truths in this time, where even 1 hour to the next. By the way, folks, we're recording this on it's Thursday.
Thursday,
Yeah.
Thursday just afternoon.
So it's Thursday. By the time you listen to this, some of this could be out of date.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's how fast things are changing, and that makes it difficult. That's the thing that destabilizes. But one of the encouraging things, if I could just pick up what you were saying too, is if one or a few of us were experiencing something that was so severe, I think it would be a different feeling. There's a comfort. It's an odd comfort, but there's a comfort in knowing we're all in this boat. If we want to use the language of the narrative.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what to make of that comfort, but we had our care group home church meeting last night. We didn't gather in a home. We stayed in our homes and used Zoom technology on our computers and had a great conversation. We plan to do it at least once a week with each other to stay in touch. And there's just this odd comfort that we're in this together, and we're here to support each other. And it helps with the doom and gloom to have these rays of light. Relationships are strong. You mentioned at the beginning of your sermon, Jesus is still God, and we can still be assured of these kinds of things in our lives. But that's kind of what we want to get to in the text as well. Maybe this would be a good time to pause too and just say, we said how we're feeling. How are you feeling? And do you have a place to express that? Because it's really, really healthy to talk it out and make sure that you are doing some reflection about how is it going inside. So if you have family and friends that you're doing that with, fantastic. If you don't, please give us a call. Please chime in. We do want to help. We do want to come alongside. We're trying to figure out how we do that best. But don't keep to yourself. This is not a time to let self-isolation be complete social isolation. So anyways, just a word of encouragement there.
Yeah. And text, email, if that's a better way to do it, we can definitely connect in those ways too.
How interesting it was that back in January, conversations with Pastor Stephanie as we tried to work out the theme for Lent, that would be helpful and relatable to children as well as adults, because we wanted to do this all together. And so that's where some of these titles came from. Titles that kids could hear and go, yeah, I get that. So are you thirsty? Are you hurting? Are you scared today? Not knowing at all what kind of relevance some of these titles would play today, and so feels good to actually be wrestling with something that is really relevant. Let's talk a little bit about being afraid. Is it okay?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Jesus says,
I'm afraid to have this conversation.
Jesus says, don't be afraid. Or what was the actual text?
It is I, don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. So, I mean, for some literalists out there who read this text and lift it right off the page and say, oh, clearly being afraid is a bad thing. It's a wrong thing. Jesus says don't do it. Is that how we're supposed to understand it? Or is there a nuance there that is a little bit more helpful than just that?
I think when I grew up with this text, or the do nots, there's lots: do not steal, do not lie, those ones that seem more actions that we do.
Thou shalt not.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you lump these ones in, you get that same mindset. If it says do not steal, or thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not be anxious, thou shalt not be afraid. And so we can just kind of level it and just plainly say they're all the same kind of commands. And I don't know. I think there's a lot to unpack there of how we see ourselves as humans and our emotions, and we often rank emotions as good and bad. And so anxiety or fear can be seen as bad emotions, so don't have them. But I know for myself and many people, we don't really get to choose what emotions are coming up. And no human is limited to certain emotions. You might feel other ones more than others, but we have a full range. Everyone has felt fear in some capacity in their life, and so that is the first challenge I have with this text of do not be afraid. Well, fear, if it's about fear and this emotion we have as humans, what happens when we look at that as a bad thing and that we shouldn't have it? Like if you hear this as I'm not allowed to be afraid, what happens? Like, what do we think of ourselves? Often when you're afraid, we just deny it, right? Or maybe we feel shame or guilt.
If I was a better Christian, I wouldn't be afraid.
Yeah,
If I
exactly.
trusted Jesus more, I wouldn't be afraid.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that thinking can lead to those places, and that's hard to get out of when you're in a place where you're feeling something that you can't control, really. Emotions come up, but you're supposed to somehow control them.
Right.
And so that's where I think a lot of that confliction comes. So, yeah, for me, I hear this, and Kerry, you mentioned this in your teaching, I hear this as Jesus saying, because of who I am in my presence here, as the Messiah, as the Jesus that the disciples knew in this narrative, that you don't have to be afraid. You are not allowed to be afraid. And I think there's a difference there. I don't know if you guys feel...
I was thinking about this morning, about this fear. How do we wrestle with our fears and the reality of it, and the command? It's not a command. It's Jesus saying, "Don't be afraid." So the image that came to mind was a parent comforting a frightened child. And you know, even if it's a little child or a toddler, you might hug them and hold them and say, "Don't be afraid. It's going to be okay."
Yeah.
And you know, it's a comforting word. Don't be afraid. It's not, you're a bad little child.
Yeah, stop
being afraid. That's poor parenting. I'll go on record and say that.
Yeah.
But the comforting side of things is what I'm taking from this. His knowledge, the knowledge of his presence, is a comfort. So it's a comfort to hear, "Don't be afraid." As I think about that caring fatherly image or motherly image.
Instead of a rule.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the English text is interesting here because you know, we try to make sense of it in our own idiom. Don't be afraid. There's just a negative word, not, and this fear word, right? Fear not would be appropriate, or you don't need to be afraid. Back to you have an option here. Now,
if I can just jump on the text thing for a sec.
Yeah,
this is where I loved the unpacking it with the two-word play on words there. That's not really a play on words, but I am, fear not.
Right.
That's the bare bones of what's being said.
That's right. Yeah. So it's not that we have a choice in our fear, as in you don't have to
feel it. Like
feel
it can just go away.
Right. We're still going to feel it, and if I think we should be honest with our emotions.
Yeah.
I don't think we should try to mask our emotions. We shouldn't listen to the full extent of our emotions all the time. But we should let them be what they need to be.
We're emotional creatures.
They're going to inform us about what's really going on externally or internally, and we ought to pay attention to that. You said something in a previous conversation about it's the choice is more, will I continue to extend that feeling by the way that I perpetuate it? I'm not sure if you use those words, but interestingly enough, the word fear here in Greek is phobeo, or phobos, which is where we get our English word phobia.
Yeah.
And whenever we talk about phobias, we're actually talking about something unhealthy. Because it's a fear that's been perpetuated or extended in some way. I think that's what you're referring to.
Well, moving into irrational, like not all fear is irrational.
Right.
being afraid of real danger that's in your life is rational. That's, we're creatures of survival, and
sometimes we should be afraid.
Yeah, exactly. But it's when it becomes irrational, and that's not a shame that it shouldn't become irrational. But I like that you said pay attention to it. That in the place we're in as a society and as humans now, whatever emotions are coming up, paying attention to them can help us realize why they're there and rationalize them and put them in their place, in the sense of it's okay to be afraid. Why am I afraid? Like, I think of, if you're a parent or if you're a leader right now, if there's anyone that you're responsible for, whether it's financially or as, to keep them safe, you need to feed your kids and your family and all those things. Now your fear and your emotions, like, they're in light of your circumstances, if that makes sense. So like I imagine, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but I'm not allowed to be afraid, because what my kids will then become afraid, or they won't see that I am leading well, or all these other pieces to it. And so I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to not, especially when we're a parent or someone that has responsibilities like that. So yeah, I would encourage people, as you pay attention to those, why maybe aren't you allowing yourself to be afraid? Yeah. So what's that beneath the surface kind of thing that's going on? And that can be a hard conversation, but that can actually lead some of that. We can find out what fears we have that are very real. Like, I'm afraid that I'm not going to have a job soon, or you already might not have a job, and where is money going to come from?
Right.
It's not an enjoyable thing to bring up, but if it's there, to bring it up and realize that's a rational fear. Like, that's something that would be scary to have that circumstance in your life, and then to figure out where some fears are irrational, because right now we're just realizing we don't know a lot. Humans have never known a lot, but I just think that's something that a lot of people are it's flying in the face of us, of just like, whoa, we don't really know the future, and we can plan stuff, and now it's almost like we can't even really be future focused. This has brought us so much into the present, because the future is in 6 hours. There's another update, or in 12 hours. So,
which is not always a bad thing, to be a little bit more present focused than future focused. Live in the moment kind of thing. But when it's done by force, it feels a little raw. I want to pick up a little bit on what you were talking about in the parent-child relationship there, because we should be honest with our fears. We should pay attention to them and all those kinds of things. But there are contexts in which we have to manage them differently.
Yeah.
Right? And I know a whole lot more about the severity of any circumstance, this one or others, than my kids do, although my kids are slowly becoming adults now, and they're becoming more self-aware. But if I unloaded my knowledge and the severity that comes with that knowledge, their little hearts, that's inappropriate.
Right?
So there's a place to block your emotions and to be that comforting presence and say, there's no reason to be afraid here. Let's walk in peace and security. But if you find yourself in that situation, which we do as parents, or even those who are responsible for younger lives, impressionable lives,
or older lives,
or that's
the other end of
the vulnerable.
That's fair. The vulnerable.
Yeah.
What is unhealthy is filtering that, and then never finding a place to experience it yourself. Never having that safe place to go.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm done taking care of people. I have to admit, I'm really scared.
Yeah.
And that safe place to actually deal with your own emotions instead of just bottling it up further, right?
And I think it's in that moment when you just give yourself that chance to reflect just a little bit and be honest with yourself. That's where we make our decisions about how we're going to process it. And to me, that's where this text then starts to speak into that.
Yeah.
What does it mean for us to hear Jesus say, I am, or it is I, don't be afraid?
Right.
How do I process that? How does that become real and practical in my life in that moment when we're actually going to face this?
We want to maybe draw attention to that, because that's really the heart of this message. let's just pause a little bit here and get outside of this with some stories. When is a time where you've been afraid? Like, let's not be hypothetical. Briefly, tell us a story about when fear gripped your heart and how you responded to that. Is that fair?
Jonathan, are you going first?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few.
I deflected there.
A less
I saw that.
on a less serious note, I've definitely had a few, like, you know, you're in a Walmart or something, and all of a sudden your parents gone, and there's nothing to worry about for the first aisle you look down, but every aisle as a kid you look down, and vice versa as a parent, you look down, your fear becomes more and more kind of overwhelming of, oh no. And for me, like, I definitely can lean towards the catastrophizing or thinking of the worst case scenario. So fear can come quickly, but it can come irrationally in that sense of, like, oh no, all of a sudden I think of what's the worst possible situation that could have happened. So as a kid, I would think, like, oh, my parent just left and forgot about me, like my dad forgot about me or something. Or as a parent, you might go in that situation like, oh, they got kidnapped, and like think of the worst case, and that can be scary. So I mean, those little moments I've had, for sure. I don't know, have you guys had little
absolutely
things like that?
Can't lose track of the kids in the store, and you know they're in the next aisle over, and they're out of sight, and immediately a worst case scenario pops into them in their mind. Had that for sure. I remember one time I was a long time ago rock climbing. I don't do that so much these days, sadly. But you know, you get yourself in this spot where it's like, this is tight, and you know, it's not a big massive cliff or anything, but if I slip, I could get hurt, and you know, a moment of fear, and I went with friends, and eventually, you know, things work out. We're here telling the story, but it's just that moment when you're doing something where it's dangerous.
Yeah,
I can't say that my life has ever been in danger that I'm aware of, where I was conscious of anything. But
growing up in Saskatchewan, you get accustomed to the wicked winter and the road conditions at especially January, February, and storms are coming in and that sort of thing. And there's some places in the prairies where it's worse than other places. And so, for example, one winter as a family, the kids were young. We were driving from we were in Alberta. And we were driving from Calgary to Swift Current along the number 1 highway.
Okay.
It gets really windy down in southern Alberta. To ask anybody who lives in Lethbridge, it's a windy place, and so when you've got ice, you've got snow, you've got lots of traffic on the highway packing the snow, and it's a winter storm and the winds pick up. It can be really, really severe. Lanes go down to just one lane. Big semi trucks are trying to pass you. Those kinds of things. I've been in a number of situations like that where literally not because the kids are listening, but inside my head, I'm going, "Dear Jesus, just get me through this one, and I'll be yours forever." All of those irrational kind of prayers. So I've definitely had some of these experiences where fear grips you, and I've always, as I reflect on it now, I didn't prepare for this, but I always come back to my faith. It's always directed to God. Whether it's subconsciously or whether I'm actually thinking it through, I don't know whether God's going to actually do anything in that moment except for maybe be reassuring to me. I'm not sure if he's actually tangibly or physically helping me in those moments. Maybe he is. It's kind of a knee jerk. Maybe it's just been the way that I've been brought up and trained. Rely on God for these moments, kind of thing.
But I think that's not uncommon, even in people that wouldn't call themselves necessarily religious of any kind. Like those moments where you feel like your life is threatened, or rationally or irrationally, if you're just feeling scared. Like I think a big piece of that is lack of control. Like I think that's like you just feel at the mercy of the elements or the world. Like when you're driving, you have this car that's been designed by engineers and have put work into it to safety test it. You're trained as a driver. You follow all the rules of the road. I'm sure you don't speed ever, and you wear your seatbelt. Never text and drive. but then all of a sudden just the natural conditions, as they always are, like this earth has different seasons and different weather conditions, and it happens, and you're in that moment, and like all of that stuff almost doesn't matter. You just realize how helpless you are, really. Like that
anything could happen here.
Yeah. And so I think it is a bit of, wow, I don't have as much control as maybe I've lived my life like thinking I do,
right,
is what those moments can do. And that's not a good place to be, but that can be the birth of a realization of, oh, I need to look outside of myself at something bigger. Like that's why a lot of people they'll hit rock bottom, or they'll have a life-threatening situation or a serious traumatic thing in their life, and it actually births a faith of some kind or a new way to look at the world. And it can be really hard, and we don't want to just look for the silver lining, but that there is I think that realization that fear can bring of, oh, I don't have control as much as I would have liked, but that's okay, because I in this story can look at a Messiah who is present with me and who is powerful, and so it can allow that faith to happen, I think, in those situations.
Yeah, let's turn to that. So, as you said in the sermon, Kerry, Jesus says, ego eimi. Well, he actually didn't, because he spoke Aramaic. And so this is the Greek equivalent, which reminds us of the Greek version of the story of the burning bush. Ego eimi, I am. And so there's a certain echo throughout the whole Gospel of John where Jesus uses this. We think, it looks like he's nodding or hinting, helping people think that, oh, this is the same God, Jesus is the same God who showed up to tell Moses to set his people free. Eimi actually, all by itself, is I am. And so scholars will say that this is an emphatic phrase. Okay. It's kind of like, I am. Kind of thing, but we just translate it I am. That's the way that you would translate it. But there's an emphatic tone to it, and so that's why we think, we're almost positive, he's pointing us to the fact that it's not just Jesus, if we want to say it that way, who showed up to the boat. It's God in that moment. Yeah,
we don't want to overplay this textual nuance there, but you can't help but see something there.
Yeah.
And so it's worth taking a look at for sure.
So why should the presence of Jesus make a difference? I mean, that's really what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. I'm here now. You don't have to perpetuate this fear.
Yeah.
I'm in your midst. What's going on? Does that help you?
Well, it does help me, and it's connected to faith. Like, I've never seen Jesus. I've seen him described in the stories that we have, and those are powerful stories. With my physical eyes, I've never seen him, but I've felt things. I've felt a warm presence. We struggle to find the right words to describe what we're. This sense of comfort on my insides. I've felt that in situations where it's fearful or things are unsettled, and by faith, I believe that's Jesus, because my theology tells me that he sent his Spirit. He started with John 7 in this series. That the Holy Spirit is if that's true. If he is everywhere present, and his Spirit is the Spirit of the Almighty, the I Am Spirit, if you will, then he's here. He's here, and there's a place in me. Well, not just a place. I mean, again, our language isn't adequate.
Sure.
That is in some way tangible.
Yeah.
And when somebody else has had that same sense, you look at each other and you go, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And it's there. But this is a faith thing.
Yeah. Do you resonate with that?
Yeah. I think for me it's been similar. I think at times there's definitely been wrestling of it's not always this equation of once you're afraid or a hard situation comes, the presence pours in.
It's not like it happens every time. It's
Yeah.
like you call on the warm presence.
Yeah.
As if we control this.
Yeah.
There's other times like, where are you?
Yeah, totally.
Well,
and so where I have, what has actually brought kind of a comfort in that is the mystery of it.
Mm-hmm.
That if I, like we were saying about when you're afraid, there is this sense to just look beyond yourself, or realize how little control you have, and I almost have faith that is true, like that our life isn't just our own autonomous life, but there's something more about who this creator is, and a spiritual world among the natural world, and all these bigger philosophical questions. I think just the mystery that in some way Jesus is present in this, and that way can look different to everyone in certain ways, but what doesn't change about that presence is that it is loving and it's comforting, whatever way that might look. So almost accepting some of the mystery of it, that it's not such a formula of, when I have fear, I choose faith, and then all of a sudden this new revelation comes and I love Jesus even more, or, these different things like that might happen, but just, I don't know, it is like, it's like a strong but faint sense of like, okay, my life feels like it's a whirlwind right now, or chaos, or I don't know if I can get through this, but in some way I just know Jesus is in this.
Right.
And maybe, as pastors, people look to leaders to say more than that, and say like, no, but what exactly does that mean, and what does that look like? And at this point in my life, like, that has been what has brought comfort to me, that there's a mystery there, but it's always something I'm drawn to still, even if I'm not totally sure what's going on.
Yeah, I think we'd be completely in the wrong to draw up some sort of formula in this moment and say it's always going to happen like this, because it just simply doesn't. We know that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so let's not try to make something up. It's going to be different for everyone, and every situation is slightly different.
Yeah.
And I think that's the mystery, and I think you're right.
Yeah.
And we enter it. But what's interesting about this story is that it's found in the context of Jesus trying to teach his disciples something greater, right? So there's, if you have the time, read where John actually talks about the feeding, and then afterwards, all of the development that happens afterwards, where he's trying to show them that they made the bread, the feeding of the thousands, they made the bread the point, and Jesus goes, that's not the point. I'm the point.
Yeah.
It's supposed to draw you to me, and it's supposed to give you the confidence that I am with you. And here you are still afraid.
And in that story, he actually says, I am the bread of life.
That's right.
One of those I am references.
Yeah. And you will hunger, you will thirst, and you will drink water, and you will eat bread. But make sure that as you do that, it points you to me, because I'm the living water.
Yeah, I love that, because and what you point at the start, which is such a seemingly minor shift of how we read the Bible, but these disciples, like, this is a dynamic relationship. Like, it's not Jesus how we have everything we know about Jesus throughout the whole text up to his life, death, and resurrection, but like him saying I am is not just like, look at all the things. When we think of who Jesus is, they're going, you're this mysterious rabbi that we're following that is now I'm not sure if this is the first time, but over time has been declaring, I'm the Messiah, I am God, I am powerful, I love you, I am a comforter, all these different things, that they are learning some of these things for the first time.
Right.
So often we look at these texts and it's like, hey, we have to follow what Jesus does and do what Jesus does totally, to do that, but also to put ourselves in the place of the disciples that were learning this. Like, by him saying this, they were learning not to be afraid, and still are. This wasn't like once they heard it from the Messiah, it was like, finally, okay, we've heard it, we know he's the Messiah, we're never going to fear again.
Right.
But it's just a beginning of oh wow, as I get to know more of who Jesus is, I hope more and more that comfort comes, and that his presence, I'm more aware of his presence, and my fear is not always overwhelming me, but I'm able to take it in, manage it a little bit, think about it, and allow Jesus to be present in it. So it's this, if that makes sense, rather than like they just arrived at the end. This is the beginning of them figuring this out.
That's a really good point.
And we can place ourselves at the beginning rather than the, oh, wow, I've got afraid again. Like, oh man, I don't feel like I have faith again.
I never can get to that place where the disciples figured it out. They didn't figure it out.
Yeah.
It's learning.
What I hear you saying in this I hear coming out of it is an attitude of submission. Like we submit to this this reality, or the possibility of this reality for our lives, that His presence could actually make this difference, and that's the beginning of a journey.
Exactly.
I think that this could actually be.
It's the beginning of a journey that you're at when you've been a Christian for 50 years, or like even then you haven't fully arrived. You've certainly grown, I'm sure, as you look at people who have followed Jesus for a long time, but it's a continual posture. Like it's a dynamic relationship that takes constant, I'm going to choose that again. I'm going to choose not to be afraid again. I'm going to choose to believe or have some sense of confidence that His presence is with me, even if I don't
over
feel
time,
it.
as you choose that over and over again, it almost becomes a habit in the best possible way of saying habit.
Yeah.
It's a pattern that you've developed, that your knee-jerk reaction is to trust that He's present with you in these scary moments.
Yeah.
Are you scared? Yeah, but He's with me.
Yeah. So...
Really cool. We should wrap things up. Kerry, do you have any last words?
I think that what I just gave you was my last word.
That's a good last word. That's a good last word.
Yeah.
So we do thank you for tuning in. This, of course, isn't the last word on a subject, but we're doing this to get the conversation started. You can expect on our home church page on our website that we will put out some resources, some follow-up questions, those kinds of things, where you can continue the conversations, but maybe just start letting that simmer. How are you feeling during this present crisis? What are some other examples in your life where you've been afraid? And what does the presence of Jesus assure you of, or how does that comfort you, or bring kind of a healing or an answer to your life? And so let these simmer, discuss with one another as we have, and we'll hopefully see you soon, or hear from you soon. It would be great. Whatever feedback you would like to send our way.
For sure.
God's peace be to you.